Cannabis Common Sense, the show that tells the truth about marijuana and the politics behind its prohibition.
Hello and welcome to another exciting edition of Cannabis Common Sense. We have a great show tonight. We have Adam L. Brock of Ann Arbor, Michigan, who is Mr. Hash Bash. He's been organizing the Hash Bash there and a Cannabis Cup, the Hash Bash Cup. So we'll be talking about his long history of activism, and but stay tuned, as we always do. Let's bring out our infamous dancing cannabis leaves.
I feel the force.
All right, well, if you or a loved one need help finding a doctor to help you get medical marijuana anywhere in the country, we have a referral service. Just call us at 503-235-4606. That's 503-235-4606. So without further ado, just keep working to restore hemp. Good night. I'd like to welcome Adam Brock, aka Mr. Hash Bash, here. The Hash Bash is an annual event that's been going on in Ann Arbor, Michigan, I guess since 1972.
Yes.
Is that right? It's when John Sinclair was let out of jail and marijuana was legal for a month or
3
so
weeks.
there
And
before the legislature put it back into effect.
yes, sir. And that effect was that new law was to take effect on April 1st, 1972. And a bunch of people who were, of course, supporters of John Sinclair and who had petitioned, of course, to get him released from prison. People posted signs around town calling for a hash fest, basically as a big fuck you to the man. You can pass any law you want. We're still going to gather and smoke weed. It really wasn't a political thing. And the next year, the newspaper wrote an article about it, or that year, the newspaper wrote an article about it, called it, Hash Bash occurs. And then the next year, a state senator showed up and smoked a joint, and that got even more press for this now annual event. And it kind of blew up from there. And then back in the early 80s, started to die down, of course, with the war on drugs from President Reagan. Things really, the government stepped up their game. So there were a lot of people who would not come out and smoke weed publicly or even come to a protest. They were scared to death. And one of us, someone in our group, wrote a letter to High Times and said, you really should come check this event out. This is unlike anything you've ever seen. And they put their group together, and all of a sudden the freedom fighters were coming out. And the event, of course, this is back in the day when we would send out faxes to media, 300 faxes at the push of a button on a pre-programmed fax machine in order to send out 300 press releases, hoping one media station would pick something up, because then as soon as they did, it legitimized it as a story and we'd get some coverage. And we basically brought this event that was, into the tens of 50s of people back to 10, 15, 20,000 people at a noon rally, and 100,000 people walking around town all day. I tell people the event itself has a bigger persona than its reality. 100,000 people show up in town. Some of them get there 4 o'clock in the afternoon, smoke their 420 joint, go stand in line for dinner for an hour and a half, because there's never any, it's continuous seating on Hash Bash Day. And they tell everybody what a great time they had at Hash Bash. In the meantime, Hash Bash starts at noon on the diag and lasts for an hour or two. So, some people, there's a street fair that happens the same day, and people go to that and tell you what a great time they had at Hash Bash. I put
So that's Monroe Street
that
Fair.
Monroe
Is that
Street
right?
Fair, right? I'm a producer of a hotel takeover called the Hash Bash Cup, and we hold a competition and we take over the weekend of Hash Bash, 2 hotels, and um, it it's vendors and music, and it, it's a it's an undescribable event, but nobody goes away unhappy. It was an honor to hear back. We're on our 10th year this coming year, next year, I should say. But year number 3, I think, High Times and Weed Maps were standing next to each other at our event. And they literally looked at each other and said, "This is the coolest event we've ever seen." We have people checking in at the front desk to get their keys, smoking a joint, taking a dab with their rig right there, standing to check in. So it's a hell of an event. But we've come now with social media
So
to the,
that's a cannabis competition, right?
yeah,
Kind of
there's,
like we
we,
got the best bud,
we have
somebody wins.
we have 17 different categories last year. We give out a crystal cup every year for each category winner. It's a real competition. The entries are turned in and given to the judges 3-4 weeks before the event, so they have plenty of time to judge. When you're 40 deep in concentrates, or 60 deep in flower, you need more than just a week or an afternoon for that. So,
No, you do. There's no doubt.
and again, I've been doing this for a long time, so I'm not gonna participate in something that isn't legit. Isn't I mean, it's all blind. All the packaging is the same. Um, there is a very minimal group of people who have nothing to do with the event itself, who package it and box up the entries, and I'm the only one with a list, and I wouldn't tell anybody anything.
So you said you have 16 categories, is that right?
Last year we had 17. Yeah.
17.
Yeah. I mean, we do
Okay.
topicals. We do medically infused products. We do, of course, indica sativa and hybrid flower. We do a rosin category. We do solvent and non-solventless categories. We do edibles. I mean, there's a bunch. Candy, baked goods.
What's what's the largest number of entries into which category? Is it the indica flowers or the
It's
sativa? Do you separate outdoor and indoor?
Well, we don't have. Okay, so Michigan, interesting enough, as good as our crop is going to be this year in outdoors, we don't really have outdoor crops. You get lucky in Michigan if you could pull a good full outdoor crop. It's not like you folks on the
Yeah,
west.
winter hits early there.
Yeah. Now, that's why our indoor weed has always been so superb for the last 40 years, when the genetics
Uh-huh.
were being distributed out of Michigan, pre Operation Green Merchant, and the genetics were specifically coming out of Michigan and being spread across the country. And Michigan being an indoor climate, yeah, you can read a book written by a guy in Oakland, California, but your intake air at some point of the year is going to be 5 below 0. It doesn't address that in his book. So you have to know what you're doing. I've been blessed because I came up at the right time, where I had to smoke very little Mexican brickweed, and the BC bud got real popular. But I knew local growers who were growing killer. High Times was coming out here 3 times a year to take photo shoots for their centerfolds. That's
Mhm.
Super Silver Haze. My buddy did for 12 years. Best grower I ever met. So I got spoiled early.
I grew that one too.
Yeah, I got spoiled early.
Out
Um,
here in Oregon, I've grown super silver haze. You know, the clones get around, thank goodness. So you don't see it much anymore. There's
nope.
so many new varieties out there.
Yeah, I have a buddy that grows it. He's strictly outdoor, but he grows it. And
Mhm.
that's one of the strains I like. But I'm old school because I really got into it in the late 80s and 90s. So I actually like the haze plant. I like the landrace plants that they then took and turned into all this bred out stuff. You know.
So out of your categories, which categories have the most entries?
So that's changed over the 10 years too, because um, in Michigan right now, in the real game, the real players, they've basically moved away from concentrates that are um, everything but rosin. These people will do rosin. They'll do water extract, but that's it. They don't want any butane extraction or anything like that. They've moved on. But in flower, I would tell you that we generally get a big sativa push, but we get a lot of flower entries. Like there's people doing 3 and 4 entries of three, different strains, because
Yeah.
a lot of people do a lot of different strains. Growing's fun. They enjoy that part. They enjoy the differences in
Yeah.
the plants. So
One year, myself, I entered several strains every year in the Oregon Medical Cannabis Cup, and then in 2007 we had a really good harvest and swept first, second, third. It almost seemed, set up, but it wasn't.
you're right.
It was a blind study. And the judges got 30 days or more to judge them. How does it work with your cup, and what is it called again?
It's the Hash Bash Cup. We're on Instagram under
Okay.
Hash Bash Cup if people want to check it out. It's interesting how we do it. So we announce the turn-in date soon, so people know that they have to have a crop ready for March. Our event's the first weekend, Saturday, generally, in April. And this year will be 4, 5, and 6. So 4 weeks before that, because I got something to do the 3 weeks before that, but 4 weeks before that, we will have our turn-in on a Saturday. I then have a crew of people who work all night long putting together our judges' packs. And then on Sunday, the judges show up and pick them up. Part of the reason for that is I don't want your entry any longer than I have to have it. I don't want to be responsible for it. I don't want you to complain that your concentrate temperatures got goofed or that your edible was not kept at the right temperature. I mean, we do it that way so that it's in and out. It's not in our hands. We give people. Last year we gave them 3 weeks. This year we'll give them 4 whole weeks. And we keep getting more and more entries every year also. So,
Cool. Yeah. What's your largest category you've ever had? Like how many entries? That's what I'm trying to get to. Like, have you had, like I saw in Seattle, one time in Seattle, the High Times Cup there had like 80 entries. They had to break it up into 2, and you didn't get like a week to sample 40.
I know. I watch what other people do and I make sure not to do that. We have had 60, I think there were 60 flower entries one year. However, sativa entries. However, you have to understand that it goes up and down with what's really popular. As soon as the commercial market opened up, all of a sudden there were a lot of caregiver growers that eventually got out of it and went and worked for licensees, so they couldn't be caregivers anymore. And our cup is not a licensed cup. We're not. These are all caregivers and anybody else. We don't care who you are. As long we have licensees that enter our cup. They don't do it under their company name. They do it under an individual's name, and they can penny purchase the product out and deliver it. We announce their name for them, but the entry is entered under an individual, so they don't have license problem. But our competition is really a caregiver. I use the term black market because that's where I came from, and I don't want people to think that the legacy market or whatever new names people come up with isn't what other people know it to be. John Sinclair once asked me, I was his road manager for 25 years, and we were best of friends. And he once asked me, Adam, how come some of my friends that I've known for years now only use the word cannabis? Now, you have to understand one of John's favorite books was called Really the Blues by Mez Mesro. And in that book, they give you basically every name for weed you've ever heard in your life, 90% of which you never did because you weren't around when it was popular in the 30s. So this is a hell of a book. I recommend everybody read it. But Sinclair was really really
Yeah.
get it.
Yeah. Mesro supplied Louis
Right. And
Armstrong.
Sinclair didn't understand why these people were doing what they were doing and changing their language and the word they use. And I explained to them that they're trying to not use words that they feel are either racist or offensive or whatever. And he laughed because, you can travel the world and you can ask for marijuana, and only in South America, or South of America, I should say, will they know what the hell you're talking about. Most places you have to ask for hashish, and then the guy who has the hashish, you got to let him know you're looking for the flowers, because they don't understand the words we use. They don't use them in their cultures. So for us, it became a little bit about linguistics, old school. Don't forget where you come from. I appreciate the industry and what it's at. I tell people my movement became your industry. However, this is an industry in its infantism, and you've never been a part of a emerging industry like this. When the car came, children didn't have to be told, don't step off the curb into the street. The cars might be coming, because they already knew they had to watch out for the horse and the buggy. So this is different. This isn't prohibition ended and then that day the bars opened up. Because I know people that own bars in Detroit whose families had bars that literally were open all throughout prohibition. And the day prohibition ended, they put the open sign on the outside of the door. So, we know prohibition doesn't work, but they're going to try it and they're going to do it. And people are affected by it. I meet people every day that say they never smoked weed until it was legal. How about that?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
That to me just is fascinating. Fascinating. But it's the new era. It's a whole new thing. And we're just at the beginning. It's going to change so much by time our grandchildren die, and I don't even have any yet. But by time by time they die, it will have changed so much that they will question our mental capabilities. You had to do what? You fought who for what? Oh, people used to go to prison for that. The biggest thing they're going to hem us up on,
Right.
and this is what's happening in Michigan right now, and we can get into the future, of course. I'm a descheduler. There's no option but descheduling, because in my opinion, the federal, and here's the interesting thing. All of a sudden, we're on the wrong side of the Civil War, you and I, because now we're fighting for states' rights. And we want it the way we want it in our state, not the way you have it in your state. I don't want what Oregon has. I love what Michigan has. And the question is, how come the people who wrote the laws after Michigan didn't grab what we have? Well, because it was a lot of legislators who did that on the East Coast and stuff, and they didn't want what we have. They wanted more control. Well, as soon as they deschedule, I say, and this is going to sound crazy, but if you understand this game that we've all been playing for years, you will understand what I'm talking about. I believe we should reinstate the Marijuana Tax Stamp Act of 1937. It's my understanding that the federal government gets their authority through interstate commerce. That means if something transfers over state lines, they can tax it. Originally, they were supposed to have a tax stamp. They never printed that tax stamp. And then they went and arrested Mr. Caldwell and charged him with violation of the Tax Stamp Act. I say we should reinstate that act and correct the problem that Timothy Leary went to court and proved that was unconstitutional in that law. There's a piece of it that Leary was able to prove was unconstitutional. No problem. Let's fix that, reinstate it, and make it a way for the federal government to get taxed on any weed that transfers state line. Otherwise, in my opinion, they're not entitled to any tax. Okay, they get their tax from Washington, D.C. They proved that a couple of weeks ago with some military guys. But outside of that, why is the federal government entitled to anything? And you can only deschedule it. That's the only option. So I think that would be a perfect plan. And then each state could do what they wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
I am definitely in favor of descheduling. I think rescheduling just adds another whole layer of complexity than government oversight and everything.
Interesting enough, on the CSA in Michigan, it's a Schedule 1 and a Schedule 2. How about that?
That's yeah. We have, I think, Schedule 3 here
Right.
for the legislature. There's let me ask you,
Sure.
so how did you meet John Sinclair?
So, all right. I'm real big on the truth and not allowing history to be rewritten.
Sure.
But sometimes I have to let my friends rewrite history. I was putting on the 25th annual Hash Bash, and I found out that John Sinclair had never been to a Hash Bash.
Wow.
And one of our group reached out to him and sent him a letter, I think. And I ended up on the phone with him, talked to him, brought him to town, talked to him about what he had to offer and who he was and how I think he should join up with the marijuana scene again because of what we were planning on doing. We were going to do this personal rights amendment, and then eventually we got into the legalization stuff. But I thought he should come back, and he had left. He had been a normal representative in the state of Michigan for years. He had started Larimar in Michigan. He was. It's not like he wasn't part of the weed scene. He left all of that, went to New Orleans, and became an award-winning disc jockey on WOOZ, their public radio WOZZ, I think, their public radio blues station. And he ended up, that's his passion is the blues. So he ended up meeting and interviewing everybody. Loved that lifestyle. I brought him up. I said, hey, let's do something. And I'll be honest, he needed $1,000 check cashed. And I said, well, why don't we turn this into a business deal? And from that point on, he used to call me his merch guru. I used to travel around with suitcases full of his books. He had books that he wrote in his Guitar Army book were original prints with rainbow colored pages and stuff. And
I've got one of those.
First editions, right. And we were still selling those type of things. And I that's my game is merchandising. So we got along great. Helped him with his tours, was his tour manager, all kinds of stuff. And it was really our connection through the Hash Bash, and then come to find out that we knew all the same people because he knew the generation older than me that grew up in Detroit and all that. So, and we worked, like I said, we worked together for the last 25 years of his life.
I see. Yeah, he did great things. There's no doubt about it. We were honored to have him out here a few times as well. Some other people from the scene.
People have no idea how he changed history in America.
Right.
And I'll just spit it real quick. John Sinclair, while sitting in prison, while not being given an appeal bond, which was real popular, of course, to hold him in prison and do 2.5 years waiting for an appeal bond because he was sentenced to 9 to 10 years in prison for giving 2 joints away. He's sitting in prison, and he gets indicted on the bombing of the clandestine CIA office in Ann Arbor. And obviously, John Sinclair is in prison. Pumplamunden, who was the Minister of Defense of the White Panther Party, and Jack Forrest were also indicted. And basically, that led to a request for all the discovery, of course, in the case. And one of the parties came back and said, well, the president is claiming national security, and we don't have to give you what we got. Well, that was the greatest thing these lawyers ever heard, because now they admitted they had something. And what kind of stuff did you have that's clandestine? Are you recording people without permission? So this ends up in front of the Supreme Court because the judge who found that Sinclair had been spied on was basically sued by the U.S. government. And it ends up basically the federal judge from the state of Michigan from our district against the U.S. government. And the court ruled on a Friday. They wrote their opinion. And when you read this story, and I encourage you all to look at John's Wikipedia page and look at Bun Plumundon's Wikipedia pages. But when you read the names that so-and-so was a clerk to this person, like Justice Warren was a part of this, and all these justices that we've seen come and go in the last 60 years were a part of this. They were all there. Their names are on it. And the court ruled on Friday. The ruling was going to be announced on Monday. Somebody leaked the court information, maybe it was the clerk named Rehnquist, we're not sure, to the White House. The White House said, oh shit, Monday morning, everything we're doing is going to be illegal. Saturday, they called up their boy and they sent him and his crew into the Watergate Hotel to retrieve their bugs. And they got caught doing it. And it was directly because Sinclair's people did what they did that brought the case that then caused them to go retrieve their bugs. Because Monday morning, that court case was announced. Sinclair was, everybody that was indicted was, the indictments were thrown out and whatnot. They proved that these guys didn't do it. And Sinclair obviously in prison, having nothing to do with it. And it set off what we now know as Watergate. And it's not, that to me was never the story. The story was the game. And once you understand that sometimes you have to go fight for your right in order to do something, then it means something different to most of us. We had to sue the university 5 times in 6 years to get a simple permit for amplified sound. They didn't need a permit to gather. You needed a permit to get electricity from them for amplified sound. And they'd only give us 1 hour of sound, literally had a timer shutting off the power at 60 minutes. And
wow.
Yeah, it was crazy for years, but we fought them. And we went to court and the judge said, yeah, they can do time, place, manner restrictions as long as they treat everybody equally. So for years we were limited to 1 hour. Now it's opened up a little more. Now there's a student group that it's controlled by a student group because you have full permit through the university. So it's controlled by a student group and whatnot. I'm honored they ask me to speak every year. And now that John's passed, I read one of his poems. But, it's an event, like I said, that has a persona much bigger than its reality. But it was born out of this huge tragedy that was very localized, even though there was the independent press. And through the independent press, it was spread to places like Oakland, California, San Francisco, New York City, Chicago, wherever they had these underground press syndicate. These type of stories in the Free John Sinclair movement got pretty big. So, working with him was kind of cool. I met a lot of cool people over the years. It was a unique experience. It's about as close as I ever got to John Lennon.
Well, that's what John Sinclair is maybe the only person that John Lennon ever wrote a song specifically about.
I believe there's 3.
Who are they?
Eleanor Rigby.
Was that a real person?
I believe so, yes. And I believe he wrote a song about his aunt.
Oh, yeah, Julia. And his mother.
Right.
Yeah.
But yeah, but Sinclair was one of them. And this takes me down a path that I hate. I truly hate it. On that album, there is a song that Lennon talks about women. And if you would only take the word women out of the title and put marijuana, you would understand things so much better. I can't tell you the title of the song because it would be inappropriate for me.
I know which one you mean. I know which one. It's a racist term for African American people.
And as someone who feels that we are being treated horribly, the fact that in Michigan, the only medicine that's taxed in Michigan is marijuana. There is no tax on any medications in Michigan. How can you treat us differently? Well, because we capitulate. We're willing to let you treat us horribly in order to have a safe haven, in order not to worry about odor being a problem anymore. Now you got to find a real reason to get into my pants or into my car or whatever you want. You can't say it's odor, which, you know, okay, so I smoke in my car. What's your point? You didn't pull me over for that. I mean, and that was the thing is that Sinclair's big thing was, hey, I'm all for medical. I'm all for rec. I just want to move the ball forward because really all I want to do is get high. That's all he wanted to do. He was happy to admit that, and so am I, that medical was our foot in the door. We used to tell people, I know it. No, 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 no. This is about sick people. We're really trying to help people. There aren't enough. Now, don't get me wrong. I agree with the late Dennis Perone that all marijuana use is medicinal. Okay? Just like I think there should be lithium in the drinking water, but that's another story.
If you go to Ashland, Oregon, there is lithium in the drinking water.
Right. But I mean, to me, this is it's about convincing people that they were wrong and things have to change. And that's a very hard thing to convince people. So as soon as we heard someone had a sick family member, it was all we could do to run to them with our oils and our salves and our this and our that and whatever. I got a sister-in-law that's as square as they come. She still lives at home with her mom. She's a school teacher, probably a millionaire because she doesn't pay anything. And she's got a glaucoma problem and had surgery. Then the pressure's tripled. And I said, she needs to ask her doctor about the drops that my buddy makes that'll lower the ocular pressure. They're THC based. Yeah. Can we use them? Yeah. Doc, you give her permission? Because she won't touch it unless the doc says so. And even then she won't want to because she's a square. But you know what? We used to look for squares because if we could convince a square that we could help them, they would help us. And many did. Unfortunately, I believe there's so many rec smokers that it leaves the medical smoker in the dirt. And most people don't even realize there's no difference between medical cannabis and regular cannabis, or medical marijuana and regular marijuana. Weed is weed. Now, yeah. Are there quality issues?
You know, we used to say hemp is not the same plant, but it is the same
exactly
plant.
The same
you know,
plant.
If it's grown for fiber, it's grown for seed oil.
Right. And now these people are screaming about conversion oils and stuff because if you don't do it right, it can be dangerous. Well, guess what? If you don't make Coca-Cola right, it can be dangerous. If you don't kill chickens in the right form and cleanliness, it can be dangerous. Yes, things can be dangerous. Let's work on moving forward, not backwards. How do we make it so people don't have to make it dangerous? How can we teach and educate and learn people? I mean, that's the future, if you ask me. Because I was sitting with, before he passed, Dave Watson in Amsterdam. And he said, dude, you need to try the THCM, bro. He said, you'll love it. He says, but you got to promise me you'll come to the house. You'll spend the afternoon on the couch. Dude, anything I'm going to have to commit to spending the afternoon on the couch, I'm down. Now I see people Now I see people writing about it, saying it's dangerous because of what it does to people. Well, yeah, it literally puts them in the couch. And it's I never ended up doing it because I never got back in time. He passed. But he was telling me how this stuff, and I'm looking forward to the science. I really am. And I hope to live long enough to see it. But in the meantime, smoking all that Mexican brickweed or wherever else it might have come from didn't harm anybody until the Americans started spraying it with pesticides, herbicides. And, I tell people, tell me you think testing is so important, in my opinion. You think testing is so important? Tell me the negative aspects of what they're testing for. Because I guarantee you there's been much higher mold counts on weed people were smoking 30 years, 40 years ago than ever get tested nowadays because we have some concept. The aspergillus thing, yes, aspergillus will kill you. it takes out a few people every once in a while. Is that enough reason to spend millions of dollars on things that aren't telling you what you need to know?
Or
I
if
mean,
they just controlled for that and
right,
tested for it. In
right,
a
and
regulated market that happens, but it doesn't happen in the black market.
correct. But here's the thing. I once looked up how much butane you have to ingest before it's unhealthy. And the only numbers I could find came from guess who? The United States government. Okay.
Mhm.
Okay. I'll take it with a grain of salt. Okay. 8,000 parts per million continuously for 8 hours is dangerous. So that means that poop soup, that tane soup that people used to smoke because they didn't know any better, might have tasted like shit, but it wasn't harmful.
Mhm. Mhm.
You
Well,
think that
it's drawing on a water pipe. I always worried about, you're
the
mainly
brass,
inhaling
right?
butane.
You, but it's not that much. Otherwise, cigarette
Yeah.
smokers would have problems.
Yeah.
Don't forget, don't forget, most people nowadays are smoking the modern cigarette, not like your father or you may have as a child. The modern cigarette, you light it once and it goes and it burns. The old cigarettes would go out and people would have to keep relighting their cigarette.
Uh-huh.
Totally
And that's
different.
that heater in there, right?
Yeah,
Uh-huh. Remember they told us about that. They put it in our food in the Army.
right. Well, so that, I mean, there's all kinds of things that you learn in this game that are like so applicable to everything else to me that I just keep looking for the hypocrisy of it.
Mhm.
The things that just they make sense because people never challenge them. Well, what happens when you challenge them? I was really impressed once. We had Keith Strube out to Ann Arbor or to Michigan for an event, and he actually told the story of how marijuana became a Schedule One. And
Mhm.
I'd never heard this story. And I was told that, well, what he said was everything was a Schedule One. That's where it started. And then the goal was to move everything out of Schedule One to where it belonged. So cocaine was put into the medicine things because they use it in eye surgery and stuff. Different drugs were moved around into their schedule. And the report that Nixon did that he hid that claimed that marijuana wasn't dangerous. Um, when that came out, they stopped moving anything anywhere on the
It's the
schedule.
Schaefer report, I think.
Paper report, right? Thank you. And they stopped. They just left it, and it never really belonged there. But they realized, of course, thanks to Halderman, who recorded the son of a bitch and made sure that we all know that it was really about going out after minorities and using what the tools that they knew worked because
And leftist.
they'd been employing these
Yeah.
for
Liberals. They wanted to take out liberals. It's kind of a
and they'd
rehash
they'd
going on
employed
now.
these tactics since the 50s. So
Uh-huh.
now it confirmed what they all knew, and then they changed, right? And then, of course, shortly thereafter, a generation later, we get the Reagan era, which totally crazed our industry. Except as we came out of that, we had Jack, and Jack's pushing his book, and he's saying, listen, your government lied to you, and I can prove it because what they ended up claiming was a filing error. We all know was them hiding this film I found, and he introduced us to Hemp for Victory. And he writes a book and he starts pushing his concept. And if anybody thinks they know Jack, you only know Jack. You only knew Jack if you have one of each edition. And most people don't have that much room on their bookshelf. So, he was constantly updating, constantly changing, moving forward. It was a learning process. Some things at the beginning weren't true at the end, and
Yeah.
that's okay.
I worked with him on the first edition
Right.
here in Portland. He needed a place to go. I met him in Los Angeles in '82. I had met him through the Yippie newspaper Overthrow.
Yep.
And so I They listed the Reefer Raiders. I was in LA trying to get on trivia game shows in a break in my Evergreen State college days. And I met first Captain Ed. And as I was leaving town, he said, "You got to meet Jack." And I went down to High Country just off Van Nuys and met him. But in 84, 2 years later, in 82, we talked about how they were trying to put an initiative on the ballot in Oregon. And in 84, both he and I moved to Oregon and worked on what turned out to be the second vote on marijuana legalization.
Right.
And so, in putting together the first edition of his book, long before the days of, computers, cut and paste meant scissors
Right.
and glue, he had little kids in the house, 3 little kids that were getting into all his papers. Well, we were both growing pot to support the initiative about 3 blocks away from each other. And he asked if he could come to my house with no kids. So I said, sure. And he took over the house for a couple of months there. The police actually had a wire on an informant when Jack and his partner at the time, Vanetta, were trimming at my house one time. But they never found out he had a garden too, or where he was at the time.
Cool. Very cool.
So that's a little bit of my story. So, with the hash bash, when did you first get involved with the hash bash?
It's funny. There are in the July 88 High Times, which is a green cover with a big ball of hash. There's a story about hash bash. I think it's mentioned on the cover. You open up the centerfold. Somebody had crawled on top of the library because there were no drones and taken a photograph of the crowd. You can see me in the crowd in my leather jacket that I wore and my cowboy hat that I used to wear. And I was that portable PA, because I have photographs from that year, walking around the diag. But I was part of the student group that was on campus. I'd show up to their meetings at a local restaurant. We'd have dinner. We'd smoke a joint in the basement, think we were real cool, and everyone would go their way. And I would meet with this group. Well, eventually, this group became a student group on campus also, because they needed to pull a permit that was eventually required from the university. And I eventually became the president of the U of M's normal student group, even though I wasn't a U of M student, because you didn't need to be back then. And so I was the guy whose face was the face of Hash Bash, because I worked in a family business. I didn't have to worry about getting a job ever in my life. I could use my real name, Adam L. Brook, and not have to worry about, getting fired or anything. I mean, cancel culture was very different back then, but still, I saw this hypocrisy involved, and I got involved. And also, Hash Bash used to be on April 1st. It was in the mid-90s that we took a poll of the crowd, because it used to happen midweek too. And we said on 1 April 1st, we said, hey, listen, if we move this to the first Saturday in April, we'll always have a bigger crowd than if it was on the first.
Yeah.
So the crowd agreed.
Yeah.
So we moved the date. But because it used to be April 1st, my birthday's March 31st. So I used to throw big parties at my friends' houses that were going to U of M. And the next day, wake up and we'd go to, some of us would go to Hash Bash. And eventually I became popular amongst this group. Once High Times started coming out and they bring the Freedom Fighters, we would go open up a campground, that state campground that was about 30 minutes away. And it was closed for the season. We went in and used it anyways. The marshals showed up, or the ranger showed up. And he was like, what are you guys doing? And it's like, well, we're here. He's like, well, I'll unlock the bathrooms. I'm like, it's already been done. we got it. We'll take care of everything. And then the next year they showed up to collect their money, because, every campsite they wanted to get paid for. So we did that a few years out there. Roger Belknap, one of the Freedom Fighters, used to bring his teepee. It would hold 100 people with a fire in the middle of it. We'd have council out there. And every year after the Hash Bash itself, it would end at 1:00. We would leave the diag, because it was just an unfriendly place, because they would arrest people for weed and all that. And we would go over to a restaurant called Dominic's, and that's where the Monroe Street Fair happens now. But we would take over the restaurant, And the freedom fighters would hold council in the upstairs. It was a big room, and we'd hold council. We'd pass the feather and all that. And that's where I was elected Freedom Fighter of the Year in '94. And I was actually up against Jack Hare. And I like to point out, because Jack was the guy who had written the book and was trying to teach us all what the hell was going on. And I was more popular because I put on the local event and everybody was there for that event. I beat my hero, who I didn't know was my hero at the time. I just thought he was a great guy who took me under his wing because I was a Jewish kid and he thought I was great. I mean, I have a handwritten list of all the head shops he used to call on when he was in the sales business. And that to me was, when I got something like that, that was huge. That was an honor that he was like, here, you're in the game, you might need this. Okay, cool. So I spent 30 years after I was Freedom Fighter of the Year in '94. I spent 30 years working that award off because I was turned into something that I appreciate, but that's not what I was going for. So
Yeah. You became a freedom fighter.
Well, yeah.
Thank you. Speaking of the hash bash with John Sinclair getting marijuana legal for a short period of time, but something that happened just back in 2001, just before what everyone knows is 9/11, was a shootout at Rainbow Farms there.
Yes.
Where
no F's.
And it was kind of blown off the air. It was a big national story for a couple of days until the next day when 9/11 happened. And then it was just pretty forgotten about. Did you have a history there?
Oh, yeah. I was part of Rainbow Farms. I helped Rainbow Farm. There's a difference between Rainbow Farm, which is what we're talking about, and Rainbow Farms, which has an S on it and is the new incarnation. The original thing that was run by a couple guys named Tom and Raleigh, they would come to Ann Arbor for the Hash Bash Cup, or for the Hash Bash, it was before the Cup. And I would throw this party the night before, and they worked their way into our circles because they were putting on these events on the west side of the state. I explained how, because of the diagonal sidewalks on the diag, which is where we hold the Hash Bash, if they put people out there handing out flyers and stacks of flyers of their event, their year's worth of events that they knew they were doing, they'd get a draw from all over the state, because we brought in a draw from all over the state. And you'd hand a flyer to someone and they'd turn around and go, oh, can I get a stack of those? I'll pass them out, So I helped them blow up and make this thing popular. I went out there as a host. I helped work the stage. I, helped these guys. They built some stores. They built some buildings. They did a great thing. And then the government went after them. That's the only way to explain this. The government wanted the property. They wanted to split it up. They wanted to get rid of what was going on out there. And it was a tragedy. I mean, I tell people all the time, I have a real hard time that time of the year because, we knew about it in real time, and some of us didn't know if they were coming for us next because we didn't know what was happening. I've called the FBI twice in my life. That was one of the times, because I went to high school with a kid that became an FBI agent. And I said, if there's anything I can do to help my friends, please let me know. I called it the Waco of weed. That title's been co-opted by other people who I'm not going to mention, but I called it the Waco of weed at the time. There's a book written about it called Burning Rainbow Farm. I talked to the author and actually worked as a merch guru for the author of the book, Dean. I took him on tour, went to the Seattle M Fest one year with him and helped him sell his book. I talked to him extensively. My little bit in the book talks about the fact that I asked Tom and Raleigh if I could shoot guns out there because it was that desolate. And I wanted to come out during the week and shoot some guns. And they were like, nah, man, we don't allow that. I was cool with that. But of course, I ended up in prison over guns. So it's kind of for some foreshadowing there. But they were the most peaceful people in the world, and this should have never happened.
And the FBI murdered them with sharpshooters.
Actually, one was an FBI sharpshooter and one was a Michigan State Police sharpshooter. And it's a tragic story. Again, you can find it on Wikipedia. Tom was crawling back from the neighbor's house after grabbing some coffee. He ran out of coffee, so he broke into the neighbor's house, which of course is certainly welcome amongst those neighbors. Took some coffee and was crawling on his, on his body on the ground, crawling. And according to the report, he thought he saw something in the woods, so he picked up his rifle to look at the scope, and that's when they killed him. And then Raleigh was in the house, and that was at night that Tom got shot. Raleigh said he wanted to see his son. And this whole thing started because his son was removed from school one day by CPS and not returned. And that's what kicked off this whole thing. They were supposed to go to court. They said, fuck it, and just started burning down their property. But they promised Raleigh that he could see his son, and he was supposed to come out at 7 o'clock in the morning or something. And at 6:45 or whatever it was, they noticed smoke coming out of the top of the building. And they claim Raleigh walked out on the front porch with a rifle, and they shot him. And it was just it was a tragedy of tragedies. And I tell people every year, that time of the year, I have a real rough time with it. And I then eventually make a post that basically says, I'm having a hard time mourning your 3,000 plus people when I'm still trying to get over the fact that the government murdered 2 of my friends. And I've never been the same. A lot of us have never been the same. And it changed the weed politics in Michigan, because they were putting on these events in order to fund these ballot initiatives. And that cut the funding out from some ballot initiatives that had been approved, that we had collected signatures once, didn't make it, we were doing it again, that type of thing. And these guys, it was all about raising as much money as they could to print ballots, to do everything. And it cut us down for 8 years until we were able to get medical pass with a separate medical ballot and ballot initiative. So, but Rainbow Farm is a real
Well, things sure change. That. I don't know if you know, I came out to Michigan in 2008. I know you knew my associate, Ricky G is what everybody calls him. We kind of started out, I think we helped about 15,000 patients all across the state, from the far north down to every different quarter, really. I know we went to Houghton Lake a number of times, which is really nowhere.
No,
but
right. Yeah, but
right.
You probably did well while you were up there. They knew you were.
Yeah. A lot of people came from the surrounding area, that's for sure.
Right.
But
yeah, I'm well aware.
It went. Yeah. Well, let me. Okay, we're almost out of time. Is there anything you'd like to point people to look at what's going on now about the Hash Bash or the Hash Bash Cup, or any other work you've got going with merchandising?
I can always be reached at Adam L. Brook on Instagram or Facebook. The Hash Bash Cup has its own Instagram page. Hash Bash has pages on Facebook. You can always look. We put a real basic page at hashbash.com up that literally gives date, time, and place, and it stays static until the next year. Because with this event, that's really all you need to know.
Right.
So I encourage people. It's a hell of an event to come check out. I've had over the years some of the most amazing speakers spoke there. And
well, maybe I'll come out next year. I've been meaning to come for many years, especially with our business there. I just never had a chance. I just got to the Boston Freedom Rally for the first time here this past week.
I was there.
I was there
probably 30 years ago.
I know you came to the Seattle Hemp Fest a lot. You know, we were a
Yeah,
presenting sponsor there, but we never got you out in our Portland Hemp Stock Festival.
no,
We're talking about doing another one of those. You know, Jack gave his last speech at our
yep,
Portland Hemp Stock Festival in 2009 and went backstage and had his second major stroke heart attack. But the Hash Bash is the first Saturday in April.
yes. Which I think this year will be April 5th.
And at least it's not the coldest part of the winter.
No. And I mean, people always talk about it because we have rain some years. We've had snow where there's an inch of snow piled up on your hat because you're standing there for an hour.
Yeah, I can imagine. Lake effect snow.
Right. The weather doesn't matter. I tell people just make sure when you wake up in the morning on Saturday that you dress appropriately for the day. And some years it's hot, some years it's cold, some years it's wet, some years it's dry.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I know. All right. Well, thank you for coming on, Adam. We've had Adam Brook, Mr. Hash Bash, and founder of the Hash Bash Cup, and working with the student group there at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, put on the annual Hash Bash, which I think in 2026, that'll be the 54th year. Is that right?
55th.
55th.
Yeah, we have an interesting
Okay.
math problem that people have to use their fingers for because you can't subtract the dates because if you do that, it doesn't take into consideration the first year. So it started in 72, and yeah, it's a funny quirk that
it makes sense. It makes sense.
Right.
Well, I really appreciate having you on, Adam. I hope I get to meet you in person sometime, and keep working to restore hemp.
I appreciate it.
Right.
We're
My
always
pleasure.
willing and able.
Hey folks, just wanted to thank you for having me on this second annual virtual Hash Bash event. I appreciate the opportunity. Of course, many of you know that I organized the Diag Rally for many years, and I do appreciate the people who put these things on. It does take time and effort. Of course, it would be nice if all the activists were on the same page and moving forward as one force. But as I've said for years, what really makes our movement unique is that we have many people from all walks of life who all believe in the different aspects of moving the ball forward. But our goal, obviously, is to move the ball forward. It's all about getting people out of prison, making sure people aren't arrested, and basically turning marijuana into what it should be, and that is a benign substance. And while nobody's ever died, there certainly have been tens of thousands of lives ruined by law enforcement and the rules and laws that are being used against us. So it's important that people get involved. I do encourage you to join groups like Michigan Normal. ASA has returned to Michigan. Look them up. But get involved and do something for your community, positive, related to marijuana, even if that means going to your city council meeting and getting up and giving your point of view. It's important that we normalize marijuana use. It is not the devil's lettuce or the scourge of society that the government has spent the last 80 plus years trying to convince the people that it was. Unfortunately, we have a lot to work against. We have a lot of misinformation to correct, and it's through opportunities like this that we can change some minds.